The emerging socio-political ideologies of the early 20th century Europe presupposed liberation and equal opportunity for the individual through their utopian ideals. George Orwell's novel 1984 from 1949 and Fritz Lang's film Metropolis from 1927, however, refute this idealism, suggesting that the fundamental disharmony between the individual and hegemonic power structures create an environment of oppression, subjugation, and social unrest, presenting ideological extremes as destructive to freedom and autonomy, and encouraging us to question political movements indifferent to human suffering. Arising from the author's contemporary concerns with ideological extremes, Orwell's 1984 explores the implications of totalitarianism, censorship, and coercion as mechanisms of collective societal control. Cognizant of these cultural anxieties in the aftermath of World War II, Orwell manufactures an ongoing allusion to Stalinist Russia through the antagonist O'Brien and the direct emulation of Stalinist ideology that permeates the text. The metaphor and analogy comparing the party's ideal of a world of steel and concrete, of monstrous machines and terrifying weapons, to a boot stamping on a human face forever, alludes to a menacing and surging Eastern European wave of industrial and military superpower, reflecting the contextual anxieties with the morally ambivalent nature of 20th century utilitarian socialism managed by a pervasive culture of fear and intimidation. Within this political context, O'Brien's anaphoric assertion that there will be no loyalty except loyalty towards the party, and that there will be no love except the love of Big Brother, warns of the subjugation of individual freedom to the imperative of the party ideology, reflecting Orwell's concerns with the self-propagating nature of power and control within Stalinism that served as a progenitor to individual and collective oppression. This motif of individual subjugation resonates in Lang's socialist critique of an industrial utopia in the film Metropolis, which foreshadows the director's concerns with the rampant industrial capitalism that characterized 1920s Weimar Germany. Lang encapsulates the unjust hierarchical nature of capitalism through visual symbolism and juxtaposition in the opening scenes. The opening montage of close-up shots depicting the rotating and thrusting of eccentric discs, crankshafts, and flywheels presents the ceaseless movement of industry absent of human direction or control, positioning the text within a world of mechanization and industrial excess. The establishing shot depicting the biomechanical movements and bleak regimentation of workers descending into their subterranean factories, symbolically bound to the 10-hour shift clock and accompanied by the leitmotif funeral march, conveys the marginalization and dehumanization of the working class. This description of the masses corroborates those of Walter Lippmann, an American thinker who compared the general public to a bewildered herd that is not qualified to manage its destiny. In contrast, the sybaritic eternal garden of the wealthy and social elite alludes to the Garden of Eden. The aerial shot depicting the liberated, self-determined movement of the youths in airy outdoor stadiums and waltzing to the leitmotif Venetian trichord coalesces in the image of the Tower of Babel, as capitalist energies reach vertically towards a deified economic paradise. These juxtaposed worlds are emphasized in Joe Friedeson's thinly veiled Hermetic axiom, as above so below, which describes the mirroring yet opposite environments in which the thinkers and workers live in the horizontal stratification. In this way, Lang evinces a brutal disregard for the productive energies of the working class, reflecting the contemporary anxieties with the ramifications of unchecked capitalism, indifferent to its human consequences. Hinting at Foucauldian notions of agency and power, Orwell warns of the manipulation of technology and industry by oligarchies as a mechanism of control, envisioning the government metaphorically plugged in on any individual at any given time. The ubiquitous party slogan, "Big Brother is watching you," and the telescreens, an electronic panopticon of Foucauldian surveillance, serve as sophisticated forms of internalized coercion through creating a consciousness of permanent visibility, allowing political institutions to monitor and manipulate behavior. Coalescing in the fictive threat of thought crime, Orwell recognizes the reductive impulse of party slogans and restrictive propaganda, warning of the subjugation of autonomous will as a consequence of these mechanisms of control. Parodying the dialectical materialism of Stalinist Russia and the reality control measures of Newspeak and Doublethink, Orwell suggests that the manipulation of epistemic truth through communist political dogma is more insidious, allowing the party to metaphorically capture the inner mind through cutting language down to the bone. This destruction of literary nuances and expression eliminates the capacity for rational thought and freedom of consciousness, subordinating intellectual and emotional diversity to the ideology of the party. Cognizant of the Lockean ideals of personal freedom that underpin Western philosophy, Orwell directs us to resist this ideological assault upon our intelligences, suggesting that these 20th century totalitarian ideologies represent a form of psychological incarceration that violates the sanctity of the free mind. Lang's narrative relies largely on biblical allusions and religious symbolism to evoke the inequity of industrial capitalism. As the creator and only ruler of Metropolis, Joe Friedison is likened to the Gnostic demiurge, a demigod who is creator and ruler of the material world. Friedison's use of the allegorical compass reminds viewers of his role as the great architect of Metropolis, with it alluding to the Masonic symbol for gold as the great architect of the universe. Drawn like Christ to experience the suffering of the underprivileged, his son Frieda descends into the workers' factory and is confronted by the Moloch machine. His allegorical hallucination, imagining the mechanical monstrosity as a pagan god of human sacrifice, consuming workers within its fiery bowels, positions the Moloch as an altar of industry, paralleling the vast insatiable engine of the city to a biblical underworld of molten steel and black smoke, thus heightening the moral ambiguities of class separation and the subsequent suffering of the proletariat. In shifting into the workers' clothes and manning the Paternoster machine, the evocative image of Frieda with his arms outstretched along the allegorical clock face, pleading "Father, will 10 hours never end," draws a direct allusion to the crucifixion of Christ. This positions Frieda as a champion of the underclass, whose willing sacrifice to the allegorical machine symbolizes man's enslavement to the rituals of industrial capitalism. These allusions coalesce in the image of the false Maria, a mechanical manifestation of the whore of Babylon who serves as a symbolic archetype of capitalist energies, evoking the Antichrist of industry, bringing chaos and apocalypse through false idolatry and misguided devotion. Thus the film conveys Lang's concerns with the injustices brought about by ideological extremes, demanding a more moderate socio-political framework, valuing the individual with a more humane approach in its structure. Positioned thus, such utopian ideals promised by these ideologies were proven prophetic fallacies in their execution. Orwell's 1984 and Lang's Metropolis reflect the problematic implications of these ideological extremes, exacerbated by the inequity and subjugation of the individual and their freedoms.